All right, viewers, we're here today covering a lot of things actually, and probably a lot of you have seen online a lot of the crazy stuff about health. One of the things was Liverking. There's lots going around, and I thought today was fitting to have Dr. Pran here with us today to sort of give a little bit about what he does, what he believes in, and I guess how we can learn something from a specialist. So thanks for coming on, Dr. Pran.
It's a pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me on your podcast. So I'm a gastroenterologist by trade. I'm a medical specialist. What that involves, fundamentally, it's a study of the human gut and the digestive tract, how we break down nutrients, how we break down food and assimilate that into our system or into our body. So I think I've been on a bit of a journey for the last few years because the medical industrial complex, or the medical pharmaceutical industrial complex, which is a massive behemoth of a business, obviously, I became very disheartened with it because I just found that there was very little focus on root cause. I had a feeling or a bit of a, excuse the pun, gut instinct, I suppose, that a lot of our issues begin with nutrition or diet. So yeah, it's been a journey of sorts, and in that journey I've learnt a lot of things, delved into a lot of areas, and I've come up with the conclusion that health or disease, health and disease are opposite ends of the spectrum, obviously, a multifaceted problem, and require a very logical, open mind to try and understand where it all kind of went wrong. With regards to the Liverking, I mean, we can talk a bit on that, but this is sadly in the modern environment. This is the new image of health. Do you know what I mean? Someone who's clearly using exogenous hormones and whatnot, and a host of things, obviously, to grow a body like that. That is now parallel with what health entails, which kind of shows that as a society, a lot of our views, our perspective, have all become skewed somewhat. So this leads the population to be really confused about what does health really entail, which is the question that I've been trying to answer for some time now.
So up until a month ago, he said he wasn't on steroids.
Yeah.
So you have these young children or middle-aged men trying to achieve a body like this.
Yeah.
By doing it the correct way, maybe the way you suggest. Psychologically, do you think that's going to have a long-term effect on especially the younger generation?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, if you spend enough time in commercial gyms, right, you'll see a lot of people start off with weight-based training or weight training, resistance training, however you want to call it, because we're a society that we've got a really short attention span now, whether the use of the iPhones has promoted this, or it's just the nature of how we are evolving as a society. We've got really short attention spans, and I think people fundamentally give up on a dream of achieving a healthy body through hard work and graft. Mm-hmm. It takes years to graft a healthy body, and so
I still haven't made it there yet.
Don't worry about that. I've been putting Steven through a few crazy sessions this week. So
it's a journey. Look, it's a journey. It's an absolute journey, and you just see them give up very quickly, and because these sort of drugs like Tren and steroids and so forth, they're readily available now on the black market, and just they're not frowned upon. You just see a lot of these kids get on it pretty quickly.
So what is Tren?
So look, I think if we were to strip it back from a very basic perspective, testosterone as a hormone, and there's a whole host of hormones that are what we call anabolic. They help you build. Okay. As a male, you produce large amounts of testosterone, right? And testosterone has many effects, but one of the effects it's got on skeletal muscle is hypertrophy. It helps you grow.
Okay.
Right. And so if you're after aesthetics or whatnot, because a muscular body is considered aesthetic, attractive and so forth, this is what you'd sort of supplement with.
Right.
As males, we make them in our gonads or in our testicles, right? And so the issue with supplementing exogenous steroids is that your body stops producing its own.
Right.
It senses, well, it's coming in from somewhere, the levels are high. We'll just stop producing. Use them for long enough, and the body can shut off completely. So these are some of the dangers with it, amongst other things. There's other issues associated with it. So they're not a benign tool, as many people think they are. They're commonly used now.
Yep.
A lot of gym goers are using them. And the scary thing is you see a lot of females utilizing these drugs as well for growth.
Really?
Yeah, because again, it's all come down to the aesthetics. We've become, as a society, very, very focused on that narcissistic appeal. Like we're really obsessed with how we look. It's not really about health anymore. It's more about the image of it.
Correct.
And I think social media platforms like Instagram, Twitter and whatnot kind of promote that element of narcissism. So it's a cultural shift.
Correct. Yeah. Just because you look healthy doesn't actually mean you are healthy necessarily. Like
Exactly.
For example, a lot of women now who are Instagram models, they have the perfect body, right? And they promote it through that they've just been working out their whole life. But a lot of it now is plastic surgery. So then once again, younger women, younger men are getting this idea that this is what I need to look like, but it's actually not achievable.
Yeah, it's a warped perspective of what health entails. Like if you look at human beings and any biological system, whether it's an animal or an insect or reptile, it doesn't matter. And human beings are animals. If you want to look at an animal when it's most natural in its environment, you look at it basically as is in the wild. Okay, like say if you look at a pig in the wild, it's a very different animal to a pig when domesticated. Right. Even the quality of the meat's different. Right,
oh, really?
It's the same thing.
Is it really?
Absolutely.
Yeah. How does that occur? What causes that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's the answer's not straightforward, but let me put it this way: pork classically pork in nature is a red meat.
Really?
Right. Okay. So that's human domestication, human manipulation,
genetically modified diets.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. They're just a grain heavy diet,
which is commercialized to be able to. Yeah, it's all commercialized to be able to sustain that level of growth.
Absolutely.
Look at salmon.
Yep. Absolutely.
Salmon was never meant to be this bright orange, beautiful color.
Yep.
Carrots are not meant to be orange.
Yep.
So we've actually manipulated food over time to allow the commercial market to latch on because it looks good. Incredible. So we've been ingraining this mentality for such a long time.
Yeah.
That everything has to look good.
Yep. Yep. Exactly right.
Scrap all the important stuff.
Yes.
Let's go to looks.
Absolutely. And
from ground roots.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Go to an organic fruit store, pick up an organic fruit. It's small. It doesn't have the shine that a lot of the non-organic fruits in Coles and Woolworths would do. They're often marked. They've got imperfections on them.
Oh, you can't eat it if it has a little cut in it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But that's how food looks in a natural state. And as a population, our perspective has shifted so much that we want this. This is what we're calling for. So guess what? The corporate revolution provides. And so it just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that snowballs on and gets worse.
So when do you think it all turned south? Do you think it was during the Industrial Revolution or earlier than that?
Look, the Industrial Revolution's an interesting time. I mean, if you'd have to really go back in time. I think if we go back to my statement about humans, how do you view them in their natural environment? That's probably what health entails. I think you just need to look at most hunter-gatherers, right? If you go into a hunting-gathering community, and these are rare communities now, you still find them in places in Africa and maybe some of the islands and so forth. If you look at these sort of humans, they do not look like someone like Liverking, right? And you put a human like that side by side with Liverking, and you ask an average Australian or American, whoever, who's the healthier one, they'd say Liverking, and that is a fundamental shift in culture, right? So beauty it's cultural. It changes. It shifts over time. Like, back in the day, Marilyn Monroe was considered absolutely stunning, and she was. But in this day and age, would we really find her to have the beauty that she requires to reach the levels of fame that a lot of stars have?
Or mainstream media definitely wouldn't.
That's right. So things have shifted, perspective has changed, and that has occurred with not only health but beauty as well. So people are just seeking the short, easy way out, which I think is a flawed journey, and one that has to end in tears. And with regards to when do I think it turns south, if we go beyond or further back from the Industrial Revolution, humans, we're a species. We've been around for 300,000 years. Prior to that, we were pre-human, okay, and that's millions of years of evolution. But modern humans come about 300,000 years ago, right? Up until 285,000 years ago, we're hunting and gathering, fundamentally very reliant on meat and fat for sustenance, and whatever fruits we could forage, which were seasonal. Grains were non-existent, very rare to come by. Starch was small tubers that we found in the ground. Okay. Now, 15,000 years ago, we don't know what triggered this. There was something called the Agrarian Revolution prior to the Industrial Revolution. Yep. This is the rise of farming. We don't know what pushed humans towards this, but the rise of farming was a very critical point in our history, because our population globally went from a few million to a species that's really lived in harmony with nature, dependent on nature. Our fertility rates were low because we're always nomadic, moving from place to place, to then settling and becoming farmers and having a steady source of energy from grain, in particular wheat. Which is, there are many grains in nature, but wheat was one of the big ones. Our fertility exploded over the Agrarian Revolution because we just had a steady state of energy. Yeah, so our population went from a few million in a few thousand years to the billions that we see now. What did it do for our health? This is a controversial area, but there's plenty of evidence in the fossil records that the Agrarian Revolution, although it allowed for increase in fertility and the rise of the population globally, probably was detrimental to our health. Our dentition, our teeth got worse, which is often a sign that general health is poor when you've got terrible teeth, and that's what starts occurring. Our heights reduce, we become much shorter, our bone density starts reducing, and there's evidence of diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis and so forth, which you can read in the fossil records, obviously starting to rise. So there's always a trade-off in nature, right? And if the trade-off was that we were going to settle, have a steady energy source from wheat, and have our fertility explode, that human health potentially declined as a result of the Agrarian Revolution.
So on that point with heights decreasing, so are there fossils showing that prior to this revolution that people were taller and then their height decreased during this revolution?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then what would be the argument then in terms of people saying now our life expectancy is a lot longer than it was then?
Yeah, it's a great question. Okay, this is a phenomenal question, and I think we need to spend a couple of minutes kind of understanding that modern medicine, and I'm a product of modern medicine. So when a doctor such as myself speaks on it, I think it's important that some importance is given to it, because I've lived it, I've grown up in this industry and matured within the industry. We take a lot of credit for average lifespan being 80 years old, say, here in Australia. Modern medicine gave us that, is what many people believe. Many Australians would say, well, that's thanks to our doctors and modern medicine. That couldn't be further from the truth.
Really?
Modern medicine's done very little to increase lifespan, okay? Wow. The biggest contributor to increasing lifespan was our engineers. The rise of plumbing, right? The rise of drainage of sewage, these sort of things that contributed to hygiene, right, were the biggest causes of our increasing lifespans. As human beings, we're programmed to live long lives, and prior to that Agrarian Revolution, that's what we did. We were nomadic. Lives were hard. People fell off rocks, got hunted by animals, whatnot. But given no intervention like that, people would live long, healthy lives. 80, 75, it's not unheard of in these hunter-gatherer groups at all. And they do this without vaccination, without modern antibiotics,
they still exist.
They still
in the middle
exist.
of Africa.
So that's right.
So why do we think that medicine is
well, that's the great sleight of hand.
Yeah.
Okay, we're talking about $1 trillion industry here, right? Disease is $1 trillion industry, and so for something to be thought of as indispensable, it must be marketed as indispensable to the population, right? Okay, and I'm not knocking modern medicine. It's got brilliant benefits.
Correct.
However, we've just got to be careful thinking that this is what's contributed to our long lifespan. Yes, we might be living longer, but the quality of life has diminished significantly. We're keeping people alive for longer that potentially, nature would have claimed them, but we keep them alive a lot longer, perhaps in a state that they don't want to exist. And we see that a lot in high-level care nursing homes, where people really, especially with terrible illnesses, dementing illnesses, that no longer recognise their family and loved ones, and their quality of life is poor, but we keep them alive for another 5 to 10 years. And you've got to question, at what point does quality of life trump quantity of life, right? So going back to my point on engineers and plumbers and so forth, this was a critical part of the human lifespan increasing. Hygiene, improvement in hygiene.
Okay. Also, I wanted to dive into those industries as well. You talk about $1 trillion industry. You've got one which is fastly emerging, which is called the Vegan Revolution, where right now, in my restaurants and what I do is, we see these vegans come through the door. We see these vegans advocate for a particular diet. That's okay. But there's obviously views upon that, and there's benefits, and there's probably negatives on those diets. There's so many diets out there at the moment. And as the years go by, I feel like I'm seeing more and more and more vegans coming to the table. Over the years, I've had the pleasure to serve you in my restaurant and to cook you plenty of meat, and I understand we do enjoy a good steak together. But shed a little bit of light on veganism, and I guess you've had a few come through your door, and what have you done for the vegans coming through your door? How have you changed their diet, and what has it done for them? Because they're going to veganism to, I guess, heal themselves, or to find another sense of hope.
Well, also in terms of my wife's a strict vegetarian.
There you go.
She doesn't do it for health reasons, though. She does it for ethical reasons, in terms of loving animals. And
but I guess you got to be practical about it as well,
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And I guess what's your word of advice for people following these diets?
Sure. I think if you look at the journey that human beings have had, meat is a unquestionable part of our journey to being human. Mm-hmm. You don't grow a brain with this level of capacity on a diet that was not nutrient dense. We would not have grown the brain that we've got, which I argue is probably one of the most powerful systems potentially in the universe. Human intelligence is unrivaled.
Out of control, yeah.
It's unrivaled. And that evolved simply because of something called the expensive tissue hypothesis, which is that, and this is where the gut and the brain are super linked. We went from being a primate, which is an animal very similar to the chimpanzee.
The apes, yep.
Yeah, the apes, great apes. We went from an animal that depended on fermentation of low-quality plant fibers and fruits to shrinking our gut because the energy needed to be diverted elsewhere, to developing the brain. The brain primarily is fat, and fat was an important part of our journey there, right? So biologically, we're hardwired for meat. Okay, and that's one argument. People might say, well, look, as human beings, surely if we're able to bend the rules of nature, which we do, well, surely our diets could be banned. My argument's always been, let's not combine sanctimony, right? This virtuousness that people want to put out with nutrition. Nutrition's a science, sanctimony is your personal journey, and good luck to you. But I think it's important not to combine the two, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what's occurred. I think over time, especially in the last 5 to 10 years potentially, it's become promoted by large bodies, large groups, perpetuated through social media that look to
heavy marketing.
To save the planet, you must become vegan or vegetarian, or to be ethical, you have to become vegetarian, because look at how these animals are treated. Now, I'm not one to argue that factory farming is horrible. I mean, you just have to see factory farming of chickens to know that these animals do not live a good life. But at the same time, it's hard to ignore the many billions of animals that lose their lives every year, billions, potentially close to trillion globally if you look at it, because of the monocrop culture used to generate the foods that vegetarians and vegans eat: soy, wheat, corn, maize. I mean, these animals that are destroyed are destroyed in huge amounts. Rabbits, fish, the runoff of pesticide into rivers, polluting them, creating issues within the marine ecosystem.
This is crazy.
So you're saying through the farming of those grains and things like that, that's actually causing an effect on the environment as well.
Absolutely. So if I kill a cow to feed my family, that cow feeds me for a year.
Yep.
Right? So whereas if you're consuming a diet of grain, soy, and that's your dependence over the year, I would argue that you've killed far more animals. And does a rat's life defer to a cow's life? And if you've killed 10,000 rats to
disruption to environment too.
Absolutely. And I'm not a big fan of the monocrop culture. I think that's a terrible way to farm, and it's very dependent on glyphosate and other pesticides to sustain it, which has inherent issues of their own. So
when you say monocrop, what does that actually
mean? Monocrop is if you drive past into rural New South Wales, say, and you come across a farm with row upon row of the same plant. Mono is one.
Yep.
That is monocrop agriculture. And to facilitate monocrop agriculture requires a lot of chemical input, not just chemical input, but other major modifications to the land that human beings have to intervene in. Now, if you leave a land without farming it, just leave it by itself, it regenerates in a way where you've got native plants, you have native grass come through, and it becomes a polycrop setting where many different plants come in. That's how nature works.
That's regenerative
agriculture.
Yes. Yep.
Regenerative agriculture harnesses nature and works in conjunction with nature, utilizing rotational grazing, which mimics the great herds of ruminants and animals that once roamed planet Earth. Okay. And that's what regenerative farmers do.
Yep.
They harness these animals and rotationally graze them so that they don't decimate the land. The output that the animals put out through their feces fundamentally replenishes the land. The land is allowed to grow and the animals move back in. That's how nature works. Regenerative agriculture is the solution for human health. Not only is it the solution for human health, it is the solution for planetary health. So when people virtue signal about, look, I'm vegetarian or vegan to save the planet, well, I argue that's fundamentally incorrect. Not only that, and I'm vegetarian for ethical reasons, say, well, that's bringing sanctimony into something which bears no factual points at all.
You talk about the footprint as well. Like you talk about, let's say, for instance, we go harvest a cow. This cow, in the most ethical way, dies, hangs, gets butchered, ends up in our hands. If we were to modify grains and soybeans to mimic a piece of steak, the steps in the process is far more than a single cow.
Absolutely.
Far more.
Absolutely.
And that's the biggest thing as me as a chef that I'm concerned about, is the fact that people aren't looking at those steps and looking at how much disruption to environment, how many steps are in place, how much commercial factory sort of inputs there are, and then all of a sudden ends up in a freezer bag in our supermarket. We deep fry it and go, oh my God, it tastes like chicken.
I was at the shop the other day. You know what I love, actually? I think it's Beyond Meat. This is what they sell. And nothing against it. Like, so my wife eats this. This is why I know what it is. It says plant-based beef patty. How can you call something a plant-based beef patty?
It's incorrect. And that should be
It's false advertising.
false advertising.
It is, isn't it? It's crazy.
It should
Beef
be
is beef.
Yeah, and the amount of input that goes into putting these patties together, the horrible oxidized vegetable oils that go in, various plant proteins, which I've got no issues with, but plant proteins are always incomplete compared to animal-based protein. Soy is probably the closest when it comes to animal-based protein in terms of the essential amino acids within it, but it's got its inherent issues. I worry about the chemicals utilised, like glyphosate or Roundup. It's huge amount utilised to run a monocrop agriculture. So it's rather than eat this plant-based patty, and I'm not being critical of your wife, but rather than
Annabelle, listen to this.
This is for you.
You might end up here on this couch.
Rewind it a few times and play it back.
I'll be sleeping on this couch from now on.
No, that's all right, mate. We got you.
The plant-based patty requires a lot of inputs, the chemicals that go into it, and on a fundamental level, it's fortified with nutrients to try and mimic what beef has. So we're trying to mimic what nature creates. And we got to remember something. Cows are a product of our own hands as well, to an extent. We domesticated them a few thousand years ago. It was called the auroch, a wild creature, and we domesticated them to fit in with us, to become more docile, to provide us sustenance with not just milk, with meat, with tilling of agriculture, right? And so when I'm a Hindu by birth, right? I was born into a Hindu family. We revere the cow.
Sure.
Modern Hindus believe that the cow should not be consumed. It should be prayed to. But that's a subversion of what ancient Hinduism was. Ancient Hinduism, many thousands of years ago, before it became subverted, that cows are not to be consumed, was we revered the cow for what you provide us with. Okay, meat, milk, and work.
Well, paying its respects and praising it for giving them life.
Absolutely. So
this is why I get so hurt when someone says they want a well-done steak. I cry inside. I look at them and go, well, we look at this whole situation and yes, we do promote a protein-based diet from animals, and I do as well, because I feel like in myself, in my body, that I react best to it. I train, I work hard, I get the most energy out of it. It's subjective to me. And obviously, if I wanted to change that, I would seek someone like you to give me the guidance and the help to move on from that. But I tell you what, when we get a well-done steak come through the kitchen, it is disastrous, because what we're actually doing is we're getting rid of the nutrients out of the steak completely. So at that point of view, you can go and eat all the grains and soybeans as much as you want. But if you're going to mistreat the animal in a sense to the way you cook it, then really you need to change your diet.
So, absolutely.
So if you cook a steak well done, you're stripping the nutrients out of that.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
So meat actually has a temperature point where the bacteria in the meat, which actually hold a lot of the nutrients in the meat, actually start to die. Yeah. So you're looking anywhere probably beyond 54 degrees and above for a piece of steak, let's say. You're really not getting much out of it. Like you really, it actually becomes quite carcinogenic. It's probably not good for digestion, I'm sure. Like you're the expert there, but I definitely try to do my homework and all this stuff. And the way you cook your food is also equally as important the way you choose it.
Yeah, right.
Choosing it, cooking it, consuming it, making sure that it fits within your diet. And hopefully, if you had concerns, you've gone to a doctor like Dr. Pran and said, what works for me and what tests do I need done to ensure that my body is running rich? Yeah. It's running well. It's a well-oiled machine.
And all in all, we're not saying one diet's wrong or one diet's right, or if you're vegan or vegetarian, that's fine. But it comes down to what you said, Doctor, about virtue signaling. And it's virtue signaling based on emotion, not actually based on nutrition. Now, what would be your ideal nutritious diet that you think that we need to eat to live a long, healthy life?
Yeah, look, diet can be personalized, right? Diet can be personalized. And just going back to the original point before I delve into the question, the biggest issue, and this is why I respect people like Josh, and I've supported his business, and it's great to see him grow into this really successful restaurant. But as human beings, our entire evolution's been about acquisition of food, right? The whole journey has been about, well, how do we nourish ourselves, right? And so we've always been connected with our food supply, whether it's coming from the waters, whether it's coming from a tree, whether it's coming from underground from a tuber or from an animal. We've been extremely connected to our food. Up until even a few decades ago, people were butchering their own animals, on their own farms, and they were connected to it. They knew where the food was coming from. Mm-hmm. Some of the most ethical and loveliest and most spiritual people that I've spent a lot of time with, and a shout out to the Broadside Hunting Group, Eamon Waddington and his group.
I've seen those posts.
Yeah.
If it is anyone who's watching this have seen a doctor with a goat or an animal on his shoulders in the rain, in the mud, in the middle of absolute nowhere, this is the guy.
Well, look,
this is cool.
I won't boast and say I'm a great hunter by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just learning, and I'm learning a lot from these guys. And these are some of the most spiritual people you'll meet. They ethically harvest the animal, they pay respect to the animal, and then they consume the meat. Not a single ounce of meat goes to waste on that animal. And some of the healthiest food was, wild caught deer and goat and pig even, some of the healthiest animals you can consume, because you've got an animal living in its natural environment without human intervention to change its composition. So yeah, look, I think I'll go back to that point, that we've become extremely disconnected from our food supply. Like, you ask a kid now where food comes from, he'll say supermarket. Do you know what I mean? You'd ask an adult and they'll probably tell you the same thing.
Yeah.
People have got no issue going to a supermarket to pick up a packet of beef, but as soon as you get a hunter hunting an animal and harvesting that meat for his family, that they've got an ethical issue with it.
Yeah.
That's a massive disconnection that these individuals have, which I think is a real pity.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, even on that, I think I would find it very difficult to go and kill my own meat. If I had to, if there was no food in the supermarket, I probably would. But if you said to me, go and kill this goat, or go to the supermarket and buy it, me being naive and not understanding what you understand, I would say, well, I'd rather go to the supermarket. I don't want a little cute goat looking at me saying, please don't kill me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But what this leads to over time, right?
No, but that's real.
Did he talk English while doing that? Or?
No, he said,
Excuse me, Steven. Please don't do this to me. He was saying that to me at the gym this morning, actually.
Yeah,
he was looking at me this morning at the gym. He's like, please don't do this to me. And I was like, another set. Get down, another 10 push-ups now. Watching those arms wobble. It was great.
Love it.
But,
listen.
Back to the talking goat.
It is just no such thing as a bloodless diet.
Yep.
And that's my point. So if you're walking into a supermarket, you've just outsourced the killing to someone else. If you're a vegetarian or a vegan and you're saying you're sanctimonious and you're virtuous because you're consuming a bloodless diet, well, trillions of animals have died worldwide just to do this. And not only that, just to summarize, that monocrop culture is just horrific for the environment.
Yep.
Okay. And so, I draw the line when I hear people say cow-based farming or cattle ranching is terrible for the environment. There's lots of nuances in that. And
they say it's one of the top 3 causes of global warming.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Well, it goes back to the fact that many animals now, and Josh would be great to speak on this, we desire meat that's marbled and got a lot of fat through it, and the Wagyu and whatnot. To achieve that, you've got to feed these animals very heavy grain-based diet. To do that, you've got to have monocrop agriculture to provide the grains for the animals.
Right.
That's not regenerative agriculture at all. That's not working with nature to rotationally graze. This is factory farming.
Mm-hmm.
Commercialized completely. So
within a time frame as well. This is very time sensitive.
Right.
We're trying to basically get a crop of something, basically finish its life cycle so we can consume it within a period of time.
Yeah, correct.
And if they screw that up, you would see what's happening right now. At the moment, over the past years, there's been some mismanagement of some of these crops. And at the moment, us consumers and Australians and restaurants and whatnot are feeling the effects of short supply. Majorly.
Yep.
And it's been quite difficult to be a chef right now, and to manage stock has been incredibly hard, because on the other end of that is managing a customer.
Correct.
And managing a customer who doesn't understand where things come from, how it got there, the reason why it's on your plate. They don't understand it. If a piece of beef is a touch chewy, mate, you don't get a second chance.
Yep.
Disconnection is massive.
Yep.
Why did we call this podcast what it is? Because I wasn't happy with the fact that Khalid named his song Young, Dumb and Broke. Why should we tell kids to be young, dumb and broke?
Correct.
Why don't we all be young? Why don't we all work out, eat well, love well, do well? Let's not be dumb and let's not be broke. Let's make smart decisions.
Correct.
Let's educate ourselves.
Correct. And it's about proper education from a professional like Dr.
Absolutely.
Pran here.
Well, not just that. I'd argue that it doesn't need to come from professionals. I think we've been conditioned to believe that, to get health, you must have a professional kind of guiding. You need a wellness coach, and bless the coaches and things out there. I respect what they do, but the reality of it is education and self-improvement, health, all of that just comes from a place from within, right? It's you don't need someone to guide you through it. It's just simply understanding our history. This is why I'm so big on understanding human history and human evolution, because once you understand history, or once you understand where you come from, you kind of know where you're going, right? And I've always tried to sort of fit in. Going back to the Liverking, that those ancestral tenets, there's not much wrong with what he's saying.
Yep.
It's just how he went about doing it for personal gain. Correct. Right, I think is problematic. He was selling a product, and the image was part of a product.
Look at this guy on the TV. Look at him. Who knew by eating raw testicles that would get you a chest like that?
Bit of liver as well.
Bit of liver. And for this
beard,
guy to basically be on like the top of talkback shows,
it's ridiculous,
across the world, promoting this type of diet with this elite type of figure, which we know is so bloated and so I don't know, magnified.
It's ludicrous, Josh. And I mean, I knew you wanted to touch on him a little bit today, and I actually didn't follow him because the first time this guy's image popped up, someone sent me a reel of him. I knew straight away he was on performance enhancing drugs.
Yeah.
I mean, you could just tell by the way the guy's
complexity of the body
built. It's not a jealousy thing. You just physiologically you could tell that he's utilizing exogenous components.
100%.
And so I never followed it, but I read up on some of the tenets today, knowing that I was coming for the talk. Not much wrong with what he's saying. Sleep, move, eat well.
Oh, there's a lot of good there.
There's a lot of good there, but as everything with the modern world, it's been sold with an image and sold with a dream. And so you've got people out there millions of people believe this story, right?
Totally.
And
the guy's huge right now.
It's huge right now. And I don't think it'll really matter, right? Because this is what people associate with health. Now you got all these Marvel and DC movies that come out with superheroes with the main actors who are all juiced to their gills, right? And this is who people idolize. This is what people look up to. This is the concept of beauty, and that's become warped. I'd argue if you want to look at the real beauty of a human figure, look at the hunter-gatherers. Lean, efficient, well-built. That's the most of the African Asian groups. In Europe, you would have seen a more stockier type of hunter-gatherer. You don't get many hunter-gatherers in Europe now because it's all been gentrified. However, you would have had a more stocky individual, more equipped to deal with the weather. The Vikings, for instance, they would have been, absolute units of people, and they would have carried more fat subcutaneously because you've got to deal with some of the European winters. And so it's a really interesting area, but don't conflate aesthetics with health. That's the point that I'll keep making.
And just quickly, Doctor, on an anti-meat argument, I know we're talking about monocrop.
Yeah, monocropping.
If we look at, I guess, our animals that we eat, like from the supermarket, Okay. That's not positive. That's not definitely a good thing either, because I heard this study, we need to fact check it, but apparently 80% of the antibiotics that we create actually go to animals, not to humans. Have you heard that stat before?
Yeah, look, the problem with overcrowding animals, right, and especially in chickens, this is very prevalent. The chickens are in such tight spaces, they're fed so much grain, they become so overweight that their feet can no longer support their own weight, so they become scabbed and scarred and infected. So the antibiotics go towards as a preventative measure to stop that infection. But I think that statistic is somewhat conflated, perhaps in America and places like Brazil where there's
based off America. That was American.
We don't understand, right? Like as Australians, we should be, you know, and I'm not born in Australia, but I'm so proud of this country, and I spent a lot of time in New Zealand. I feel we Australians and New Zealanders, no offence intended, but we don't value what we've got here. Mm-hmm. The meat that we produced is of the highest quality globally, right? And instead of Australians enjoying this food, what we see is this meat just shipped overseas to places like Dubai,
America. We're one of the main suppliers
to America and to China, right? But we produce some of the best regeneratively farmed. Well, not all of it's regenerative, but these animals are
down the Riverina area.
Absolutely, they're out on the paddocks eating amazing grass, right? And we don't understand how valuable that is.
I've got a bit of a funny story about chickens. So
let's do it.
So I'm going into battle with one of my consulting clients. I write menus and do a lot of stuff for a lot of other restaurants, and one in particular is a chicken based company. You know, they have shops and whatnot around, and
like fried chicken,
charcoal chicken, bit of fried chicken, whatnot. And they've come to me and went, Chef Josh, we need help. All right, cool. I'll come in and help. So we've gone through everything. We've gone through their chicken, and we've noticed that this particular brand had free range chicken. And I went, okay. So I actually sat down the owners and said, are you guys familiar with the word free range? And they went, oh yeah, the chickens go out on a field, they run around, all the rest of it. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get a chicken professional to come in and tell you exactly the difference between you paying that much and that much for a chicken, the difference. And they went, oh, wow, okay, well, let's talk about it. You know, we're in a position right now where we're trying to cut costs and trying to maximize expenditure in these venues. I get someone to come in here and talk about it. So pretty much in Australia, as this is what I have been told, that a chicken of its free range type, the doors open to go outside. Chickens work in flocks. One chicken walks out, 10,000 chickens walk out. One chicken walks back in, 10,000 chickens walk back in. A chicken could be outside for all of 5 minutes, not even.
Yeah, correct.
And that's the only difference.
Well, it comes down to the square meterage that each chicken has, doesn't it? Are you aware of that, Dr. Pran?
Yeah, look, chicken's not my favourite protein for reasons
Loves
Josh.
a good wagyu. But really, it was basically a situation where the chickens are still cooped up in factory days.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And they have a choice whether to stay around the food and stay inside and eat and be warm and cozy, or to step outside to where the elements are.
Well, even when you read your egg packets, right, it'll say free range, and some different egg companies, producers will have, there'll be 10,000 chickens to an acre, or they'll have 10,000 chickens to 5 acres, but they're all free range. But the minor detail on that is massive.
Absolutely.
We had a good laugh about it because basically their business is on the ropes based on the likelihood that one chicken would step foot outside and that all of his mates would follow. So it was quite funny. And then, one of them went, oh, maybe it's a bit cold out here. Let's step back in. And they all go back in together.
Chickens are no different to human beings. Take a hunting gathering group, give them bread, sugar, and they'll stop hunting and gathering. Okay, and that's what happened to indigenous.
Give them substance.
A lot of that's right. Give human being an easy solution, and they'll always. Hunting and gathering is hard. It's difficult work. Just hunting one goat. I remember trekking with the Broadside guys for about 6 hours.
Wow.
And through up mountains, not a flat.
6 hours. The videos. I saw I saw the
crazy.
photos and it looked intense.
It is intense.
You were like in camo gear.
Yeah, and I lost weight over the 2-day period that I went to do it. I didn't have much body fat to lose, but I lost body fat in doing it because it is significant exertion. So any animal would gravitate towards comfort. Chickens are no different.
Yep.
With regards to the square meter rate for chickens, you're right. With eggs, there's a great brand. I think they're called Kangaroo Valley Eggs. I think they've got 15 chickens per hectare.
How many?
15. That's it.
That's incredible.
It's incredible. And, and you should see the colour of the yolk. You could just tell it doesn't have that pale yellow colour. It's orange. It's a dark orange, and that's probably highlights the nutrient density of the yolk. Various nutrients.
But are we priced out here? You know, we haven't even chat about this particular stuff. Are we priced out with eggs?
Yeah.
You know, is now cooking a fried egg going to become a luxury one day?
Yep. Yep. It certainly looks that way. It's certainly the ruling powers that control, and we live in a world of globalization. Totally. And if you've got globalization, you've got people that call the shots. The guys that call the shots, I believe, have decided that meat is just simply not a fuel or energy source that every human deserves or needs. I think this is why a lot of the plant-based alternatives are being rolled out. There's been heavy push towards it from a governmental perspective, from health bodies. There's a lot of people pushing the plant-based narrative, World Health Organization and so forth. It's a joke, really. You've got the World Health Organization saying iron deficiency anemia is a global pandemic of epic proportions, and at the same time saying, well, red meat causes cancer.
I was going to say they have that class as a type 1 carcinogenic along with plutonium.
Exactly
and
right.
Smoking.
Exactly right. They classify processed red meat as a carcinogen in the same category as Roundup and cigarette smoking and so forth,
like
and
nuclear power and things like that.
That's right. Yeah, and so I mean, I won't go into the details of it because it'll bore you guys, but all of this is based off very, very flawed, weak evidence. Now, somehow, along with labeling processed meats like sausages and frankfurters and all this sort of crap as carcinogens, and they're I'd argue they're not that great for you, but I don't think they cause cancer. They've also lumped in red meat as a group 2A carcinogen, which is, it probably causes cancer as well. Yeah. Why don't we just lump it in there? So you've got people walking around, Australians walking around believing that a pizza purchased from Domino's is healthier than a grass-fed finished steak farmed here in Australia.
Because we put a bunch of numbers up on a board and go kilojoules, calories, this one, that one, and we confuse people. Well, and within confusion, we have a transaction somewhere. Well, because people just give up. They're like, stuff it. Like, let's just buy it because there's too many numbers here.
But even from a calorie perspective, Josh, right? Take a large meat lover's pizza. Yeah. You've got 2,500 calories in that.
2,500?
Yeah, okay.
That's my daily
That's all
intake.
day. That's gone.
That's right.
And I have that from when I wake up to when I go to bed at night.
But I'd argue a lot of people, an adult would be able to polish that off for dinner if they weren't.
Totally.
And so you just ingested 2,500 calories. Now, take a grass-fed finished, like a T-bone steak, 600 gram T-bone steak. You've got maybe 500 calories in that. Yeah, wow. So you could knock off 4 or 5 of those steaks over the course of the day, and you've consumed less calories than what you've just had for dinner with your large meat lover's pizza with extra cheese. It's a ludicrous representation. So of what occurs at a numerical level. So calories do matter, and we've somehow disconnected the fact that meat's actually a very low calorie food.
Yeah.
It is.
Skip that part.
Well, it's high calorie when you consume it in a McDonald's meal with the buns, the cheese, the pizza, the milkshake or the drink along with the chips. That's a high calorie meal, but meat, it makes up 10% of a meal like that. Yeah. But somehow the meat's blamed for that entire meal. Yet 90% of those calories came from plants.
See, and calories are something that now I think people are more aware of it, but they never used to be. So when I was growing up, I was quite fat. I was really fat. Sure. And our producer here can attest to that. I wasn't aware what calories were, right? Even you go to McDonald's and whatnot. Restaurants in Australia, they don't actually record calories on their meals. They record kilojoules, right? But then how does that help the average person understand? Because I know in California, I just came back from California, they actually show how many calories are in each meal rather than kilojoules.
But how has that helped the Americans, demonstrating how many calories there are? 95% of them are overweight or obese.
Well, correct. Does that mean we're just all doomed?
This is the problem. Like these fast food companies and these bodies that are saying obesity is a problem globally, but it's your fault. Really, it's because you didn't move enough and you ate too much. But that's incorrect. They've pushed people towards these lower quality foods because we've stripped them of the ability to consume quality meats. Like a restaurant like Josh's puts out this quality meat, but you can't argue that it's cheaper to go to McDonald's and pick up a $20 meal. And that's the issue. That's where the problem begins. That one of the biggest determinants of health is the socioeconomic status of the society that resides within that area. So as people are pushed towards tighter lives, right? Like big mortgages, rising interest rates, rampant economic inflation, potential impending recession, whatnot, they are pushed towards lower quality foods. So they will gravitate towards these faster foods that are probably high in taste and low in satiety. Satiety is basically satisfaction. So it's just becoming more and more expensive to consume healthy quality meals.
So if we look at someone's wealth then, from a socioeconomic point of view,
yes,
is there a correlation between how much money someone is worth to how long or how healthy they are?
Without question.
Yep.
The eastern suburbs of Australia would enjoy the greatest health. The deep western suburbs of Australia or of Sydney would have the worst health. There's a gradient that is, it's almost linear.
So it exists. It's just not something that's made up. There's researchers backing that. Yep. Absolutely. There's no question about it. In fact, these fast food companies are so predatory that you would find that there are higher number of fast food outlets in poorer suburbs than there are in richer suburbs. Have you seen the Red Rooster line?
No, I haven't.
So if you draw a line through Sydney, starting from the western suburbs and do it to cover the west, southwest, through to the city, you'll find on one side of the line there's Red Roosters. On the other side of the line, there's Charlie's Chickens.
That's interesting.
Char-grilled chickens.
Yeah, Char-grilled chickens.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's a healthy choice.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah,
but you can see even from what you were just saying there, that line that these companies are doing, it exists.
Yeah, absolutely, and this is why I talk a lot about poverty and economic factors that come into play. This poverty gap or this wealth disparity is a massive issue with health. The bigger the disparity is, the bigger the gradient between health and disease is going to be, and that's a sad reality for a lot of Australians. In fact, the world. Do you
think it's an issue from money or an issue from not receiving enough education?
It's multifaceted.
It's a big cluster of things.
It's multifaceted.
Yeah, it's so different from household to household, family to family, individual to individual. And I find that I'm a big believer in how a person starts and where a person is today was something along the journey got them to where they are right now. Where it could be from a parent thing, a negative factor or a positive factor. But usually today, somewhere where someone is today is where they were yesterday. But it takes a really hard whack to get someone to change tomorrow. So I think in a lot of these areas where the quality of life is low, I guess they don't, and in some areas in particular, or some people, they don't have a hell of a lot to live for.
Exactly right, Josh.
And when that comes into consideration, education goes out the window. So educating themselves of who they are, who they want to be, where they want to be. Education stems from food. So how they're fueling their body and fueling their mind.
Yeah.
Are they exercising and stimulating the muscles that wrap around their bones, which I find is highly, highly important. If I don't go to the gym at least 6 times a week, I am so out of it. Like, I feel like my day sucks. Like, I feel like I'm so inefficient. Like, I feel like I can't get my list of jobs done if I am not at that gym at 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning.
And part of that's just psychological conditioning. You're a high achieving guy, and part of the conditioning that you've set yourself is, unless I've hit this target, I'm not at my optimal. So whilst you might not necessarily be suboptimal on that day, that is your yourself. That's the goals that you've set yourself, and the subconscious aspect of you feeling down about not being able to work out. But if you've got someone in poverty who's struggling to put a roof over the head of their kids, you've just got an issue whereby food's like the last thing on their list, like, the health of the foods. It's just about whatever I can get in. If it's Wheat Bix for dinner to fill the belly of my child, I'll do that. And so this is why people need to be more engaged politically, because a lot of political decisions on a global scale impact the economic environment which we exist. People are switched off politically. They don't understand what's going on economically. You pay the price for that. So we need to, I'd argue as a population, just be a lot more involved politically rather than kind of switch off and say, well, I don't engage politics.
And being connected is not that hard.
No,
Staying connected is not that hard.
Do you think there is actually benefit to siding with one political party or the other? Because my opinion is pretty much the same.
No, I think so. I think you're right. I think the right and the left are basically controlled by the brain, which is fundamentally the same. As I talked about globalization, I think the rise of central banks over the last 100 years certainly means that financially we're all kind of interconnected as a world. So I'm talking about things on a large scale rather than just with what's occurring within Australia, left or right. I don't think that matters. I think we just need to hold, bankers and the global banking system accountable. And I think we need to ask questions of our politicians as a large population rather than just a group of one or two of us, because then it just gets labeled as, well, those crazy conspiracy theorists, and you just kind of get written off. But whereas if the collective is standing up and saying, well, why is it this way, right, then you've got a situation whereby the politicians have to be held accountable. Like the evidence for COVID lockdowns, for instance, were extremely low. Lockdowns, we didn't think, even as a doctor, like, where was the evidence for that? But we were told to do something by the government. We all did it. But where was the evidence? Was it efficacious? No, we don't think it was. In fact, it might have created more harm than good. So it's a question of, well, like, we've just got to hold these guys accountable for the decisions they make.
And I guess a lot of things happen in life. And like you mentioned, if you keep people not empowered, and you create new issues all the time. Like, for example, we had spicy cough, and then we move into housing crisis now, rental crisis. Interest rates are increasing because of inflation, because of the money that's been pumped into the economy. So there's always a new issue to take effect of the other wrongdoings or mistakes that we've made before. So we just keep moving very quickly forward to the next thing and next thing.
Absolutely. When we were all locked down and the quantitative easing was occurring and they were printing billions of dollars in America, they were printing trillions to pump into the economy. And the US dollar, as we know, is the reserve currency. So every decision made in US affects the rest of the world. You've got a situation where all this money's and liquidity is entering the market. You've got asset prices hyperinflating, property prices went through the roof. Everyone bought in, everyone got into loans that they potentially couldn't afford. What's happening now? The roosters come home to roost, so to speak.
Well, the thing that annoyed me about all of that, and I run a mortgage broking company, like I mentioned before. So let's call it 15 months ago, we could start seeing that the inflation in America was increasing. The Australian Reserve Bank says, no, we're not going to increase rates for another year and a half. I thought there's absolutely no chance that this is going to happen. We're literally dependent on the American economy. When their inflation starts to rise, their interest rates start to rise, money starts to flow differently, and it will occur in Australia. So we fixed a lot of our clients for 3 years last year because we knew that this was going to happen. And it did. It happened extremely fast, extremely fast. Do you think there's a lack of foresight from professionals who get paid a lot of money to predict things?
Yeah, I think so. I think the central bankers are, I hope you don't mind me saying it, I think they're problematic. And it was
why is that? Why do you think they're problematic?
Well, you're creating value out of thin air. Central banking, money's just being printed out of thin air. And that's what, fractional lending is. As a mortgage broker, I'm sure you appreciate that. You give people loans by increasing the debt on the ledger. You don't necessarily create value right? And
Correct.
so the US dollar, which is our reserve currency, is not backed by any fundamentals. It has no pair. It used to be backed by gold. 1971,
Correct.
Richard Nixon unpegged that, and
Then we
so
went
that
to
they could freely print money.
Then we went to the US dollar standard, right? So we went from the gold standard to the US dollar
the US
standard.
dollar standard
Now we've come
is
into-
as good as gold, was their promise.
Correct.
But the issue is you can never create any more gold. You can mine it, but that a lot of input goes into that energy. You got to find the gold. Gold is a limited
Correct.
resource, whereas money, you just increase the debt on the ledger.
Yep.
And that's what's occurred. And because the US dollar is the petrodollar, it is also the SWIFT international banking system, and it is also the reserve currency.
Yep.
You've got a situation where the trillions printed in US has now got global effects. And what the US is now doing by fundamentally increasing their interest rates, they're importing inflation to all the other countries.
Correct.
And you've got a situation where, because we're pegged to the US dollar, we'll also pay the price. So, you know, when we talk about central bankers, I just think they lack that knowledge. I think this discussion that you and me have had would probably be novel to many high-ranking bankers
Correct.
within the banking system. And so why is a guy who's a gastroenterologist and a guy who's a mortgage broker having these sort of conversations when it's not occurring at a banking level? That therein lies the issue.
Correct.
Central banking's a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah. yeah.
Because
You heard it here first, guys.
You guys are connected. That's why.
One thing I do want to talk about, the one thing I want to talk about just away from central banking that I'm super interested in, you have to correct my language with it because I don't know the exact terms, but over the past 30 years, there's been studies and science to show that we have microbiomes or something in our stomach, and our stomach is actually... There's more nerves in the stomach than there are in our mind, and the stomach is actually controlling our emotions more than we think. Is that correct?
Yeah, look, I think, again, go back to an evolutionary basis for it. 5 billion years ago, as we're floating in this primordial oceans, and Earth isn't, you know, a great place for life to exist on land, right? The conditions weren't ready for it. 5 billion years ago, these creatures, you get them now, they're like hydras. They call them hydras. There is no brain. It's just something called the enteric nervous system, the ENS, okay? That's their brain. Their gut is their brain. At some point, those two separate. It becomes, from the enteric nervous system, it splits into something called the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord. So our gut isn't the second brain. It is, in fact, the first brain. That's how...
Really?
That's how the human, well, the brain... In general evolved. It evolved from the enteric nervous system from within the gut. There is more neurotransmitters within the gut than there is the brain, almost 10 to 1. The microbiome are the bacteria that we symbiotically carry. We're more bacterial cells than we are human cells. There's trillions of bugs that exist in our gut. And for human to be optimally healthy, the microbiome needs to be healthy as well. It's a complex topic. But you can't have a healthy microbiome and an unhealthy human, and vice versa. You can't have an unhealthy microbiome and a healthy human. Like these two are not mutually exclusive. They exist together. But you've got components like glyphosate or Roundup, which is heavily disseminated in our agricultural practices, which we know are an antibiotic for the microbiome. So about 60% of our gut microbiome is sadly sensitive to glyphosate or Roundup.
Really?
And we're consuming so much of it, and it's detectable in our urine and so forth. And so we're just nuking the microbiome. And that's part, like, again, it's a big topic, so I won't delve into it too deeply, but that's a big part of the rise of diseases, because our microbiome suffering, in particular autoimmune diseases like, you know, MS and inflammatory bowel disease, rheumatoid arthritis, a whole host of, you know.
So when you have people coming to you for advice on this as well, because obviously that's your profession.
Yes.
Let's say someone's having a lot of bloating or something like that. In terms of an ideal diet, what would you recommend the ideal diet is for a person?
Step one. Yep. Okay. Step one is understand that there are 3 macronutrients: protein, fat, carbohydrate. Okay. And then there's vitamins and minerals. Those are the 5 aspects that we need in our diet. That's a simplified diet for them. Of these things, carbohydrate is probably a non-essential macronutrient. Right. Yet it makes up 85% of our diet. Additionally, carbohydrate stems from farming. Farming, as we're talking about, is agriculturally, it's in Australia, a lot of it's based on chemical inputs to make the agriculture feasible. We're not eating organic foods anymore. We're eating stuff that's coated in pesticides. So when someone comes to me, the first step I try to get them to understand is that your diet is not your religion. It's simply about nutrients in, nutrients out, not calorie in, calorie out. It's nutrients in and nutrients out. And additionally, getting them to understand that the agricultural practices are problematic. So eating organic fruits, vegetables, and grains would be preferable if they can find it, but that is expensive. Again, it goes back to the socioeconomic determinants of health, that money is a big part of it. So that's number one. And number two, we teach them that protein is non-negotiable. It's by far the most important macronutrient. You could choose to get that from plants, right? Or you could choose to get that from animals. Animal-based proteins are like a Lamborghini versus plant-based proteins, which are an inferior car, right? Okay, which would be a Toyota Corolla or something like this. Apologise to anyone who's driving a Toyota Corolla.
We'll stick to
we love Corollas too, guys.
Yeah, I've owned one in the past.
But we also like Lambos.
But it's just a higher quality protein, without question. And finally, when it comes to fat's actually an essential macronutrient.
Really?
And we teach them about the importance of that. You're surprised, right?
I am, very surprised.
People don't realise cholesterol is an important synthetic precursor to building our own testosterone, male testosterone.
Wow.
So, you talk to any bodybuilder who's trying to get down to 5% body fat, where he has to go on a low cholesterol, low fat diet to reach that level of body fat, their testosterone's tank. And so this is why you see a lot of bodybuilders exogenously supplement to get to those growth phases, right? So low-fat diets, I'd argue, although they've been promoted for 40 years, right, I'd argue a problem. They're problematic. So we just teach them these nuances. Yeah. But as you can imagine, like we've just sat down for an hour and talked about nutrition and politics and money and so forth. All of these things linked together. I've got 30 minutes with a patient. Correct. Right, and a person's coming in expecting me to say, look, what are your symptoms? I'll book you for a colonoscopy and we'll go from there. And you get someone come out with all this information. There's an element of intensity to this information.
It's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming.
I'm overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's right.
I've learned so much more, and I feel like a better chef from this chat, to be honest.
So people go away and it's all just too much. So, you've got to really slowly work it in. It's a gradual journey that you have to take with people. I'd have to say, say we see 100 people with issues, maybe we might get through to only 10% of them.
Really?
Right? And that's how low the penetrance is.
Wow.
So it there's a lot of myself that I've got to give, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm very passionate about all these topics. So there are significant challenges to implementing it. Additionally, you've got our medical bodies, Bowel Cancer Australia, Cancer Council Australia, saying red meat's bad. So people go, well, hang on, you're saying this, but the Cancer Council and Bowel Cancer Australia is saying red meat's causing cancer and heart disease. How do you contend with that? So straight away you get put out as a guy who's trying to be too radical, right? And these are significant barriers to implementing good quality care. I'm not particularly radical. I just try and be as objective as I can.
Correct. Based on information.
And try to be as logical as I can based on evolution, based on science.
As well, to individual wants and needs.
Exactly
every being is not exactly the same.
That's exactly right. An elderly person might require far more protein than two young blokes coming to see me, right? Because their digestive system's not as good. So we really and I'm blessed to work with phenomenal dietitians in our service, Tom, Jessica, and Nikki. We provide personalized nutritional advice to these people because it's not that simple. It's not as simple as say, well, you just consume 2 grams per kilogram of protein per day. It's like, well, okay, what is your target? How are you going to hit them? Personalized nutrition's the future.
So I guess what does your diet look like then? I know it's hard to give an ideal diet based on age and things like that. So what does yours look like?
Okay, so look, I'm 42 years old. I weight train.
Which I still don't believe that this guy's 42. You see this guy's
mate.
body. Look at this guy's body.
I
That's
appreciate it.
incredible.
You want to go to the gym with this guy? You're talking like dips with like a chain hanging off him with like 20 kilos.
And the
like,
goats on his shoulders still at the same time.
Man, we still have to do that chest session. By the way.
We do. And I look forward to it.
What does your
Josh?
diet look like? Because I know what it looks like in the restaurant, and like I said, I've cooked for that diet for you many times
And
over
I
the
appreciate
years.
it. I appreciate it.
But what does it look like? You wake up in the morning, and I want you to sort of tell everyone what does your diet look like, and we can wrap this up.
Yep, brilliant. Okay, well, I appreciate you guys asking. And my diet may not necessarily apply for others, but I'll give you my requirements as a 42-year-old guy who trains and does resistance training. Obviously, my protein intake needs to be adequate. I generally start the day with fat and protein. So usually it'll be something like an omelette or with a bit of butter and salt or some poached eggs.
Yep.
I will generally have a black coffee, right? And I work out soon after, maybe an hour after that, okay? And so I believe your day is best started with fat and protein rather than carbohydrate, rather than reach for the muesli, which sends you on the sugar roller coaster for the rest of the day. It puts your sugar up, down. As it's coming down, you feel like absolute junk. Snacking again at 10 a.m., that type of stuff. After breakfast, I don't eat till lunch. Lunch again is protein and fat. I generally tend to do eggs and meat again.
Yep.
And dinner time, I load up on the carbohydrate. No restriction on the carbohydrate. Then I have as much protein as I can fit in. That is my priority again, right? And the protein generally will come with fat. And I'm not going out of my way to consume fat. If I'm eating a protein source like egg or meat, it brings the fat along.
So obviously before going into that recovery period, which is your sleep.
Exactly right.
Recovery period, which is like downturn.
Exactly
right.
right.
The body's renewing itself for the next day, which sets about 3 o'clock.
Exactly right.
The reset button comes.
Exactly right. I try and eat starches, so potatoes, sweet potatoes, rice, white rice.
No French fries.
Sorry?
No French fries.
Truffle fries.
Yeah.
Oh, truffle fries?
Or duck fat potatoes.
Duck fat potatoes. Truffle fries.
When I'm out,
we love the truffle fries, and at the end of the day, I always had a gut feeling that this was going to be a good podcast today. Sorry for the pun. But you like that one, eh? Thank you. Thanks, Doctor, for coming on today. Really appreciate it. Young, not dumb, not broke. Stephen and Josh over here. Thanks, mate. And, we look forward to, catching up in the future. Look forward to seeing you at the restaurant as well. It's always been a pleasure. And, mate, I really hope we can have you back on because I have learned a shit ton more than I knew before.
I've learned heaps. I'm going to go home, tell my wife, stop eating vegetarian. No, I'm joking.
Can you call me straight after?
You'll need a place to stay.
I'm supportive of my wife and I love everything about her.
Yeah. Love your wife. Love your wife.
But hey, look, if you want to follow Dr. Pran Yoganathan, Instagram, Facebook, we're going to link his information underneath the information on this channel as well. So you'll be able to connect with him. And hopefully he can help you on your journey as well.
Yeah, questions, follow it this way. Need good food, come to me. Need something with mortgage, go to him. This is why all our respective fields are important somewhere along the line.
Absolutely.
And we run our own race. Yeah. But, I think it's been really insightful. It's been really cool to catch up with you outside of what you do and what I do and actually just have this organic conversation because I guess when you're in a relaxed state of mind, you learn more, you talk more, you connect more. So that's all from us today. So thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate you guys.
No dramas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.